boy was found at the edge of a corral. He would not stop crying, and when they finally got him calm enough to talk, he said the same thing over and over. A big furry man. A big furry man would not let him pass. This was the spring of 1973, the high desert north of Los Angeles, the flat, hard country around Lancaster and Palmdale, where the wind comes down off the mountains and runs unbroken across the Joshua trees. Nobody wrote down the boy's name. He was small enough to be out near a corral alone. He was old enough to put words to what he saw. And that is most of what the record holds. A child. Crying. Telling the grown-ups that something had stood in his way. Something covered in hair. Something shaped enough like a man that he reached for the word man, and shaped enough like nothing he had ever seen that he had to set another word in front of it. That is where I want to start. Not with the monster, with the boy, and with the country he was standing in, because the country is the whole story. The Mojave does not forgive much. In summer, the ground past 29 Palms runs to 120 degrees, and the air comes off the flats like the breath of something with a fever. The distances out there are not human distances. You can stand on a low rise and see 50 miles of nothing, and the nothing is not empty exactly. It is full of small lives that have learned to wait out the sun. The kit foxes, and the sidewinders, and the jackrabbits that move at the edges of the day. But it reads as empty to a person, and a person alone in it long enough will start to do a particular kind of arithmetic. The mind does not like a blank. Give it enough silence and enough heat and enough distance, and it will build you a shape out of the shimmer and set it walking. People came to that desert to be filled or to be emptied. The land had been lived on for thousands of years before any of them, of course. The Serrano knew the oasis at a place called Mara. 29 palm trees standing around water in a basin of stone. They passed through it on the round of the seasons. The Kemehuevi camped there too. None of them stayed the way the later people stayed, because the desert teaches you that staying is a negotiation and not a right. People had made a life in that country for thousands of years. There are stone points out in the dry washes, older than almost anything else in California, and there are the ghosts of the later ones too. The gold camps out at a place called Old Dale, where men dug at the rock until the rock won. The desert is patient with all of them. It outlasts everyone who tries to hold it. The later people did not always learn that. After the First World War, the doctors began sending gassed and tubercular veterans east into the dry air to heal. They pointed them toward that same oasis, toward the clean, burning air around the 29 palms. Some of those men got better. Some of them stayed because the desert was the only place that did not hurt to breathe. Then the government opened the land to homesteaders, a law that let a person claim 5 acres for almost nothing if they would build a small cabin and prove it up, and the basin filled with tar paper shacks, each one a small bright window of human light in a dark that ran all the way to the curve of the earth. They called them jackrabbit homesteads. People still live in some of them. People still go out to some of them, out past where the power lines stop, and are not seen again. In the summer of 1952, a single order created a training center on an abandoned glider field, a strip of nothing that had served briefly in the Second World War, and 70 Marines drove out into that basin to stand it up. What those 70 men became in time the largest Marine Corps installation in the world. The Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center at 29 Palms covers something close to 1,000 square miles of desert and mountain and dry lake. It is about the size of Rhode Island. It is bigger than some countries. And the men who pull guard duty on its edges know a thing that civilians have to be told. A young Marine can stand a post at 3 o'clock in the morning at the far edge of that base, the only waking human being for many miles in any direction. Nothing in front of him but a length of fence, and the dark, and the absolute certainty that the dark goes on a very long way. That is the country. Now I will tell you the story the way it is usually told. And then I will tell you what is actually known, because the distance between those two things is the whole reason this episode exists. The way it is usually told, it begins with a rifle. A young Marine was standing guard duty on a cold night at the edge of the base in the winter of 1971. At dawn, they found him. He was alive, but he was not right, babbling, hollowed out. And when they finally got the story from him, he said a huge hairy figure had come up out of the desert dark and attacked him. The proof was in his hands. His rifle was bent in half. A steel service weapon folded like a green branch over the knee of something enormous. And in some versions of the telling, 2 other men saw figures that same night. One of them 12 feet tall with a smaller shape moving along beside it. And the government took the whole thing seriously enough that agents of the FBI and the CIA came out to the base to ask questions. And then, of course, to make it all disappear. That is the origin. That is the campfire version. It is the one that gets handed to every new arrival, told in the dark by men who heard it from men who heard it. The version that has been printed and reprinted and posted and reposted until it has the smooth, worn feel of something true. And that is how it stays alive. A recruit hears it his first night in the barracks. A guard hears it from the man he relieves on post. It rides out of the desert in the bed of a pickup and into the bars in town. There is a desert radio voice out there who has told these stories for years. The Yucca Man does not need a body to keep living. He has something better. He has 1,000 people who will not let him die. And I want to be honest with you about it, the way this show tries always to be honest with you, even when honesty costs the story some of its teeth. I went looking for the documents under that story, the incident report, the Marine's name, the federal file, any newspaper anywhere that ran it when it supposedly happened. I could not find them, not one. The bent rifle does not trace back to a record. It traces back to a retelling, and then to a retelling of that retelling, the way these things always do, each version a little smoother and a little surer than the last. There may be a true thing buried somewhere down at the bottom of it, a frightened young man on a lonely post, a bad night that got worse. The most famous version of the legend is the version nobody can prove happened at all. So let me give you the ground that holds. Go back to that spring of 1973, to the boy at the corral, because he was not alone in what he saw. That season, the high desert had what the people who track these things call a flap, a sudden cluster of sightings rolling through one stretch of country in a short span of weeks. A babysitter reported a hairy figure outside a house. 3 Marines reported the same kind of thing. And on the first day of June in 1973, a reporter named Chuck Wheeler put it all in the paper. The story ran in the Antelope Valley Daily Ledger Gazette, and it is a strange, careful, unglamorous piece of small-town journalism. It is not breathless. It reads like a man writing down what his neighbors told him and trying to keep a straight face while he does it. The article describes a sighting at 3:45 in the morning over in Palmdale. It describes footprints found pressed into the dirt around houses on the east side of Lancaster. It describes a woman who said something had come up to her house in the night and scratched at her door. And it describes the boy, found near a corral, who said the furry man would not let him pass. The men quoted in the piece are not the wild-eyed kind. They are organized. There was a local investigative group that hunted the thing, with officers and a structure, and a veteran tracker who was said to have been after this creature for more than 20 years of his life. These were people who had decided the question was worth the cost of their evenings. And it was not only neighbors with flashlights. By the time the flap hit the papers, there were men who had turned the hunt into a business. One outfit sold itself as a professional creature finding enterprise. Think about what that takes. To give 20 years of your evenings and your gas money and your good name to a thing you have never once held in your hands. And there is a moment recorded by the people who chased it that spring that tells you more about human beings than it ever could about any animal. One night, 2 separate search parties went out into the same dark stretch of desert at the same time, and neither one knew the other was there. They moved through the brush toward the same low ground. One group heard the other coming, heard the brush breaking and the footsteps in the dark, and in the panic of that moment, certain past all argument that they were being closed on by the thing itself, somebody raised a gun and started shooting. No one was hit. It is almost funny told fast, but sit in it a moment. Think about what a person has to be carrying inside them out there in that dark, with that story alive in his head, to fire a loaded gun at the sound of footsteps. The monster did not have to be real to be dangerous. The fear was already loaded, already chambered, already looking for a place to go off. 6 years later, in 1979, the desert produced two of the most specific accounts in the entire record, and they arrived from two very different kinds of men. The first was written in the dirt. Out in the Diamond Valley country near Hemet, two investigators named Douglas Trapp and Daniel Perez went out to look at a set of tracks pressed into a muddy road. Perez was not a credulous man, and that matters. He published a newsletter on the subject for years. He wrote a serious bibliography of the field. He spent his life sorting the real reports from the junk, and he had a reputation even among believers as the skeptic in the room, the one who would not let a soft story pass for a hard fact. What he and Trapp measured that day was a line of 17 footprints. Each track ran somewhere between 17 and 18 inches long. The two of them never did fully agree on the number, and that small, honest disagreement is itself a kind of evidence. The kind hoaxers do not bother to leave. The prints were spaced about 6 feet apart, and the whole trackway ran for roughly 100 feet across that wet ground before it ended. Whatever made them had crossed that road in strides a tall man could not match at a flat run, and the prints showed 3 toes. Not 5, 3, which does not match the calm, shaggy creature of the postcards, which is exactly the kind of detail that a person trying to sell you a convincing Bigfoot would never in 100 years think to invent. The second account from that year was not a track, it was a voice. A man I will only call Brian, because that is how the record keeps him. He ran a small shop out near Indian Avenue in the desert hot springs country, down where the high desert slides toward the Coachella Valley. One night around 10 o'clock, he was closing the place up and walking out into the dark of the lot, and he saw it. He said it was enormous and the color of dry sand, a pale tan against the black. He said its chest was the size of a refrigerator and its arms hung down below its knees. He said it took 2 long steps backward, 2 great strides that ate the distance, and then it was simply gone into the dark beyond the light. And that was all. A few seconds. It never came at him. It never made a sound he could name. Nothing touched him. Here is the part that matters, the part I keep returning to. Brian was a combat veteran. He had been to Vietnam. He was a grown man with a pistol on his hip that very night. A man who had already seen with his own eyes the worst that human beings do to one another. And he could not explain. Not then, and not for years, and years afterward, why a few silent seconds at the edge of his own parking lot took something out of him that the war itself had left intact. He was not afraid that the thing would hurt him. It made no move to hurt him. He was afraid of something underneath that. Something older, a fear that did not have a name and did not need one. The report sits today in the files of a research group, logged down decades after the night itself. And the man who investigated it had spent his own working life out at the edge of the military desert. A former Navy air crewman who worked at the test base and stood in his off hours as a county deputy. A man not easily spooked, he believed Brian. It is one report among many thousands, but it is the one that stays with me, because the wound in it is so plainly, so unmistakably human. In the spring of 1988, 2 young Marines were driving back down out of the mountains at Big Bear on Highway 18, on the long grade near an old cement operation, when something came up off the side of the road. One of them was a man named Ken Fox. He wrote down afterward what he had seen and sent it to the investigators. and his plain words are worth hearing exactly as he set them on the page. From the left side of the road, something very large seemed to stand up on two legs and run across. The bottom half looked human, covered with hair. The top half wasn't very visible, but it appeared monsterish, scary in other words. It crossed the road in 3 strides, 3 impossible strides that carried it the width of the highway and the shoulders both. His buddy riding with him yelled out that it was the cement monster and to go after it. They were young men full of nerve in the daylight of memory. In the dark of the moment, they did not go after it. And out west at Edwards Air Force Base, they worked the loneliest posts in the country. The test ranges where the Air Force flew the aircraft it could not yet admit existed. Miles of perimeter under a sky with no light pollution at all. And they passed down stories the way the Marines did. They had a name for a pair of eyes that more than one of them swore had moved along the dark edge of the base, at a speed no animal and no man could move. They called it blue eyes. One of the old security men described the eyes as set about 4 inches apart and standing fully 7 feet up off the ground. And he said the movement of them was extremely fast. That it was like watching 2 lights run along a wire from one point to the next. There and then, somewhere else, with nothing in between. They had a second presence they never saw at all. One that left small sneaker-sized prints in the dust where no person had any business walking. And that one they called Marvin of the Mojave. Half a joke, and half not, the way the best base humor always is. There was a story, too, that Blue Eyes had been caught once. Not in a net or a trap, on a camera. Some of the men swore the base security system had picked the thing up, moving through the service tunnels under the flight line, down where the dark is total and the only sound is your own boots. Nobody can produce that tape. It is one more thing that lives only in the telling, but you can hear in the way they tell it that they wanted it to be true, that a tape would have meant they were not crazy, that the long nights had been pointed at something real. Years later, when a group of those retired guards held a reunion, the base newsletter wrote it up. Sit with that. An official publication of the United States military in the year 2009, sitting down in print to record that these men, decades after they had last walked the wire, still gathered and still traded their stories about the thing on the perimeter. They told them with a grin, most of them. They were not foolish men. They had operated some of the most advanced machinery on Earth. And the old squadron's motto, the words stitched into their history, were Latin: ad inexplorata, toward the unknown. They had spent their working lives aimed straight at it, and a few of them out there alone in that enormous dark came away certain that the unknown had turned just once and aimed itself back. Here is a thing that troubles the skeptics and the believers both. The descriptions do not agree. Out at 29 Palms and toward Joshua Tree, the eyes glow red. At Edwards, they burned blue. The hair is dark in most of the accounts, black or deep brown. But Brian's thing near Indian Avenue was the pale color of dry sand. And down in the Borrego country to the south, they tell of a whitish one. They call that one the Sandman. Some witnesses describe a solid animal, a heavy, shaggy body you might have reached out and touched. Others describe almost nothing at all, a darkness in the rough shape of a man, defined by nothing. There is one thing the accounts do agree on: the smell. Again and again, the witnesses reach for the same words: a thick animal stink, wet dog and rot, and something sour underneath it. Whatever else the desert was handing these people, it was handing a great many of them the very same stench. A believer will tell you the inconsistency is a problem, that a real animal ought to look like one animal. A skeptic will tell you it is the opposite of a problem, that an unstable description is exactly what you would expect if there is no animal at all. And it never did settle. As recently as 2012, hikers up at a place called Devil's Punch Bowl reported being followed. something pacing them through the rocks of Big Rock Canyon, keeping to the edges, never quite showing itself. Whatever the Yucca Man is, it has never once had the decency to hold a single shape and stand still long enough to be solved. So what was out there? I owe you the cold side of this, and the desert has a long and well-documented history of manufacturing exactly this kind of fear out of nothing at all. Go back far enough. Down to San Diego County in the 1870s, and you find newspaper accounts of a wild, hairy thing that killed travelers at a lonely stagecoach watering hole called Dead Man's Hole. In 1876, a man named Turner Helm reported coming face to face out there with something he could only describe as a missing link, more animal than person, watching him from the rocks. And a couple of years later, another account ran in another paper, a far more satisfying one, in which two hunters track the creature down and shoot it dead, and describe its corpse in loving, lurid detail. It is a wonderful story. It is also a story that ran in its newspaper on the first day of April. The Desert Wild Man has been good copy for 150 years, and the people selling it have always understood the date. The desert at night drops cold and fast, and the mind goes sluggish and strange in it. Put a tired, frightened young man out alone in that, and his own senses will lie to him. Not because he is weak, because that is what senses do at the very edge of what they can handle. The wonder is not that some of them saw a monster. The wonder is that more of them did not. And a military base is a nearly perfect machine for producing this. There is also an older story underneath all of this, and I want to handle it with care, because it belongs to people who are still here, and it is not mine to bend into the shape of a monster movie. Long before the Marines and the homesteaders, the Cahuilla, who lived in this country, told of Takits. He was the first of the shamans, made by the Creator at the beginning, and then turned to something terrible, banished into the heart of a mountain, said to move across the night sky as a green fire, and to take the souls of the living down into the dark with him. Taquits is sacred. His canyon is sacred ground to the people who descend from those who told his story. And Taquits is not a hairy giant standing in the brush at the edge of the headlights. The people who keep that story have never once said that he was. There is a habit, a lazy and a disrespectful one, of reaching for an indigenous name to lend a campfire creature some borrowed weight. And it is a habit worth naming and resisting. What is true and what is more than enough is this. This land has frightened the human beings who lived upon it for as long as human beings have lived upon it. And the fear it produces wears whatever face the age is ready to hand it. The old face was a fire that ate souls. The new face is 8 feet of dark hair standing at the edge of the headlights, with the eyes catching the light. The desert did not change. We did. The fear is the constant. The costume is ours. Which brings me back in the end to Brian, to a man standing in his own parking lot near Indian Avenue. A man who had crossed an ocean and survived a war, and could not survive a few silent seconds of the genuinely unknown without carrying the mark of it for the rest of his natural life. I have come to think that is the real Yucca Man, not the thing in the brush, the thing the brush does to us. There is a part of this legend, as there is with all of them, that has gone soft and friendly and safe over the years. You can buy a little Yucca Man at the gift shop in town now. There is a music festival out in the desert that takes his name. He is a mascot these days, a wink, a way for a hard and beautiful place to sell a little of itself to the people passing through. And there is nothing wrong with that. That is exactly how a community survives the things that frighten it, by shrinking them down small enough to print on the front of a shirt. But the desert is still out there, past the last lit cabin. It is still 1,000 square miles of dark, standing behind a chain-link fence. And people still walk out into it and do not walk back. This legend has always had a quiet habit of attaching itself to the missing, to the hikers and the drifters, and especially to the people who went up into the high desert and were simply never found again, as though the country itself needed some shape, any shape on which to hang its disappearances. Search and rescue out there will tell you the hard arithmetic of it. A person who walks off a trail in that country in summer can be gone in hours. The heat takes them faster than anyone wants to believe. And the desert is so vast and so broken that a body can lie 100 yards off a road for years and never be found. The families do not get an answer. They get an absence. A car in a lot, an empty trail, a silence that never closes. And into that silence the mind will put a shape, because a shape is easier to carry than nothing at all. And that is the truth that is harder and quieter and far worse than any monster. The truth is that the desert is enormous and ancient and utterly indifferent, and that it does not give back what it takes. A creature with glowing eyes is in a strange way a mercy, because a creature can be hunted. A creature can be tracked and explained and made into a festival. A creature can be the reason, and the only alternative, the thing the creature is built to keep us from looking at directly, is that there was never any reason at all. The men on the wire at Edwards are old now, or they are gone. The Marine with the bent rifle, if he ever drew a breath, was a frightened kid a very long time ago. And the boy at the corral, he would be a man past 60 today, somewhere out there in the world. And somewhere inside that man maybe is still a small person standing at the edge of a fence in the spring of 1973, telling the grown-ups the one truest thing he knew how to say. A big furry man would not let him pass. The desert kept the rest. It usually does. That was the Yucca Man, What the Desert Keeps, written and performed by the author, by me, James Cawley. I keep coming back to one quiet idea, that the thing in the dark was never really the point. The point was what the dark did to the people who stood alone in front of it. A frightened boy at a fence, a guard on a wire at 3 a.m, a man who crossed an ocean and came home whole, and then lost something to a few silent seconds at the edge of his own parking lot. We build a creature because a creature can be hunted. A creature can be named and tracked and printed on a shirt. The other thing, the vast and patient indifference of a land that does not give back what it takes, that cannot be hunted at all. So we hand the dark a face, and then we tell ourselves the face is what we were afraid of. My name is James Cawley, and you are listening to Dust and Echoes. If you like stories like this, stories that move slow and stay under your skin, stories rooted in forgotten places, and the fear that lives in empty country, then you need to check out enterthedust.com. Newsletter subscribers get access to stories only available to people who have subscribed. I'm sending one out as we speak. I release a new story in cinematic audiobook format every single week, right here. I'll be waiting for you here, friend, and I think you will love the next one. Until next time, remember this: we never truly fear the dark or what is in it. We fear it for what we cannot stop in our own lives, and we give it a name: inside the darkness.